13 Reasons Why is actually good. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Season 1 is okay, seasons 2 through 4 are garbage. People tend to forget the good when it comes to long-running shows and movie franchises due to something that I like to call Game of Thrones syndrome. The final season of Game of Thrones was terrible. However, because of that, people tend to forget that they enjoyed the other 7 seasons. Now, that's exactly what happened to 13 Reasons Why. Season 1 was received fairly well, which is why it got adapted into a 4-season show. However, because it ended poorly, people don't remember that Season 1 wasn't as terrible as the rest. So, I would like to take us all on a trip down memory lane to remind everyone that 13 Reasons Why wasn't always bad. For those of you who don't know, 13 Reasons Why is a teen drama mystery surrounding the suicide of a 17-year-old girl named Hannah Baker. However, before ending her own life, Hannah recorded multiple cassette tapes detailing the people responsible and the reasons as to why she would do so. The tapes would then be distributed to all those responsible one by one in order they appear on the tapes, and our story picks up with the tapes reaching the protagonist, Clay Jensen, who was Hannah's friend before her passing. Now, if you ask me, that's an interesting setup. A particular reason I like this premise is because it can't end happily. The thing the audience and the hero want most can never come to pass. In a mystery, you want the puzzle to be solved and closure to be received. However, Hannah is already gone. No matter what she says, no matter what is uncovered, no matter how much you want it, Hannah can't come back. And that leaves this eerie vibe over the series because you'll likely forget she is gone at times, or worse, you'll hope someone will be able to help her. The story unfolds in 2 timelines, the present where Clay is struggling to get through the tapes and the past where Hannah is experiencing everything firsthand. As the mystery unfolds, we see both Clay and Hannah start to fall apart. Clay begins hallucinating and stops taking care of himself, and Hannah begins losing her will to live with each passing tape. As all this is going on, you also have Hannah's other reasons plotting Clay's downfall in order to keep their secrets hidden. Hannah's parents struggling to live without her, and the school trying to sweep this easily avoided tragedy under the rug. While the story focuses on the mystery of the tapes and Clay's breakdown, it remains very entertaining. Each episode that passes raises the stakes as Hannah's life gets worse in the tapes and Clay's life falls apart as he confronts the other reasons. Unfortunately, the pacing isn't always kept up due to the other elements of the story. Seeing Hannah's parents in the school deal with her passing adds to the world and are things that would reasonably happen. However, these stories are completely uninteresting and have almost nothing to do with Clay listening to the tapes or the other reasons trying to shut him down. It just feels like they're there to pad out the runtime because someone had the big brain idea to make the show with 13 in the name have 13 episodes. You get it? Because it's 13 Reasons Why, and there are 13 episodes.
Shut your stupid...
Padding issues aside, when everything focuses up, it becomes a solid mystery that is held together by its... Starting off with our hero Clay. At the beginning, Clay is just a lost young man dealing with the grief of losing a dear friend. Unfortunately for Clay, Hannah's tapes would throw him into a downward spiral. With each passing episode, we see Clay lose more and more of himself as he is torn apart chasing after answers in order to find some closure. This is nicely juxtaposed to the version of him we see in the flashbacks. Clay was a happy, nerdy, shy kid that had a crush on his friend Hannah, but he was too self-conscious of himself to act on it. Every time Clay attempted to get close to Hannah, it was of the actions of one of his friends.
So the only time you and I actually ever get to hang out is because of Jeff?
No, I mean... maybe.
As a result of this, Clay missed out on his opportunity to confess to Hannah, which leads to our understanding as to why he is losing his collective shit in the present. Clay feels massive regret for not telling Hannah how he felt, and now he'll never get the chance to. I'm going to get real for a second. Clay is told by the character Tony, who I'll speak about momentarily, that Hannah's death is his fault, and Clay agrees after listening to his own tape. I fundamentally disagree with this. On Clay's tape, we learned that Hannah and Clay began to get intimate with each other, but then Hannah had a panic attack and told Clay to leave her alone without explaining why. He did, however, the show portrays this as Clay being in the wrong, and that isn't right. You cannot blame yourself for not being able to save someone that brought harm upon themselves. Clay is entitled to feel guilty because in real life people do feel guilty because they have the time to consider all of the what if scenarios. What if I called? Or I should have known it was obvious, or I should have spent more time with them, etc. Hindsight is 20/20 for a reason, and although Clay appears to move on in the end, he never comes to the understanding or speaks with someone that explains there was nothing he could have done. That at the end of the day, it was Hannah's choice. Instead, it paints Clay, who is actively told by Hannah he did nothing wrong, as the bad guy, like he is one of the people that actually brought harm to her and ruined her mental state like the other reasons that are depicted in the show. That always felt wrong to me because IRL, no matter how many what if scenarios you think of, at the end of the day, there is no way you could have done anything, and you need to be able to accept that and move on. So if you're someone that blames themselves for something out of your control, please stop. It isn't healthy. Anyway, moving on. Tony was a friend to both Hannah and Clay, and his role in the story is something akin to a game master. Hannah entrusted Tony with a backup set of the tapes to publicly release if the people didn't follow the orders, that being listen to them and pass them on to the next person on the tapes. On top of that, Tony feels obligated to do so because he was the last person that Hannah saw before her end. Hannah gave Tony the backup set of the tapes before she went to go end her life, and Tony was distracted at the moment she did so he didn't stop her. He then listened to the tapes later on when he got a moment of reprieve and immediately rushed over to her house, but he was too late. He showed up moments after everything had happened and the cops were already there. Lastly, Tony helps Clay along his journey to finish the tapes and get justice for Hannah. Not always successfully, but, not everyone's perfect. And that's really about it when it comes to Tony. He has a couple other things in the story, like he's the ex-boyfriend to another person on the tapes, Ryan, and Tony's current boyfriend is being lied to because Tony doesn't want to tell him everything that's going on with the tapes, but none of that is really important to the main overarching story, so it is what it is. Justin Foley is a character I can see people both loving and hating depending on how they're able to accept the justification for his actions over the course of the entire show. Let me explain. At the beginning of the show, Justin is portrayed as completely in the wrong. He took Hannah on a date and allowed his friends to spread a revealing photo of her around the school, as well as a harsh rumor that said she put out on their first and only date. However, as the story unfolds, we see Justin trying to desperately stop Clay from finishing the tapes for an undisclosed reason until we reach tape 9. We learn that Justin failed to stop his best friend Bryce from assaulting his girlfriend Jessica. Now, Justin is conflicted because he comes from a very poor and abusive household, and Bryce and his family have always taken care of him in his times of need. However, Jessica is his girlfriend that he loves very much, and he doesn't want her to relive the horror of that night ever again, which causes tension and his actions to escalate until he finally cracks and tells Jessica the truth about what happened to her that night. Obviously, Justin should have told her the truth from the beginning, however, you can understand what led him not to. He didn't want to hurt the person that he cared about the most, and also he didn't want to lose the man that he viewed as a brother. In other words, no matter what Justin chose to do, it was a lose-lose situation. He tells the truth, he loses his pseudo-brother. He lies, his girlfriend tears herself apart because she's repressing the nightmare that she had to live. Although you shouldn't agree with Justin's actions, they aren't black and white as they first appear. Except the thing about the photo of Hannah and the rumor. That was just messed up. Jessica is probably the most tragic character in the show next to Hannah. Jessica and Hannah both started school around the same time and became friends thanks to their guidance counselor. However, as time went on, Jessica abandoned Hannah and even took out her frustrations with her boyfriend on Hannah despite having no relation to the situation. And then the assault happens, and visibly, we can see that Jessica isn't okay. Deep down, she knows that something happened to her that night. However, she doesn't want to believe it, and her boyfriend Justin, as I previously mentioned, told her that nothing had happened. However, there is another element to this. Hannah was hidden in the room while everything went down, and Hannah never said anything to Jessica until she released her tapes after she was gone. So she tries to believe everything is fine, but it doesn't work. She starts losing sleep, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, skipping class, but nothing fixes what's wrong. And then finally, when she accepts the truth and breaks out into tears, needing to be comforted on multiple occasions, Jessica is really hard to watch, as you see this happy and energetic young woman spiral down a rabbit hole of depression and anguish as she attempts to forget the nightmare that she has experienced. Honestly, this character could have been dealt with more nuance, but the story in itself isn't bad. Now, granted, I don't know anyone on a personal level that's experienced something like this, but I know people do try to repress trauma because it's hard for them to deal with, so the story in itself isn't a bad one, and I do like the character of Jessica. She isn't horribly annoying or anything of the sort, and yeah, I think that's really about it. I kind of just like what they did with her story, and I felt bad for her at the end of the day, despite all of the messed up things that she did do throughout the course of the show. Alex Standall is one of my favorite characters in 13 Reasons Why. I feel as if Alex perfectly represents the idea of a teenager. Everything he does is stemmed purely from emotion. He became friends with Hannah and Jessica on a spur-of-the-moment meeting. He stopped hanging out with Hannah because he thought it would be awkward since he started dating Jessica. Then he ended up breaking up with Jessica because she didn't want to have sex with him, and that resulted in him in a fit of rage creating a derogatory list objectifying her that led to the destruction of her and Hannah's relationship as friends. However, despite all of that, Alex ends up being remorseful once he finds out what happens to Hannah. Once he learns that he's one of the reasons as to why Hannah took her own life, he feels terrible and wants to atone for all of his sins and what he had done. Unfortunately, in reality, life isn't fair, just like in this show. Every time Alex tries to come clean about what he did, about how he feels responsible for Hannah's death, he gets bailed out. He starts a fight at school, he only gets a warning. He speeds down the road at 100 miles an hour, his dad's a cop, so he gets let go. He tells everyone else that's on the tapes that they need to come clean about what they did. Everyone else refuses and forces him not to say anything. Alex is torn apart. He's eaten away by all of this, and he can't live with himself anymore, which unfortunately results in his attempted suicide in the finale of the show. There isn't much to say, really. Tyler is an awkward, nerdy kid that only knows how to express himself through photography, and this leads him down the wrong path. Tyler is the most hated amongst the characters in the show, as he was Hannah's stalker. Let's take a moment here to address the irony in the room. All of the characters that Hannah deems responsible for her death work tirelessly to stop Clay and constantly say that Hannah was a liar, which inadvertently makes them defenders of the serial assaulter Bryce Walker. Yet, they all hate, demean, and bully Tyler because he stalked Hannah, which they only know because Hannah said so, which means they know she didn't lie, and it's just like, you morons are acting like vigilantes trying to get some sort of justice for Tyler because you're like, oh yeah, Tyler's a stalker. But then when you think, oh wait, if I out Bryce, that means I out myself. Maybe she did lie. It's like, pick a side. You can't be both, you stupid teenagers. Anyway, back on topic. Tyler stalked Hannah because he didn't know how to express his feelings to her. Therefore, he only knew how to take pictures, which eventually led him to stalking her outside of her window in what is a very creepy moment. Like, Tyler is outside Hannah's window in the bush taking pictures, but because he's a weird nerd, he uses an old style camera that you can hear click outside the window. And I spoke about this with one of my friends, and he mentioned that, like, imagine if you were just sitting in your room and all of a sudden you just heard like weird clicking of a camera outside your window. Like, that would terrify you because you know someone's out there, but you don't know who it is and you can't see them, which makes it all the more unsettling. And I completely agree with that. However, surprisingly enough, despite all of that, Tyler isn't portrayed as a bad person. He's just portrayed as someone that's extremely socially awkward that led him to do something that was really messed up. And over the course of the show, you see that Tyler learns to stand up for himself and learn some sort of boundaries after everything he goes through. Unfortunately, the show does allude to him becoming a school shooter by the end of the season, but because he started standing up for himself against his bully Monty, it gives you some sort of hope that maybe he won't go down that path after all. I hate Courtney so goddamn much. You know how I mentioned Tyler took a picture of Hannah that would torment her? Well, that picture was of her kissing Courtney. Courtney proceeds to lie and say that Hannah was making out with another girl at the school who was confirmed to be a lesbian, when people start realizing that Courtney was the one that kissed Hannah in the photo. You see, Courtney is gay, but she's afraid of coming out, which is fine. However, her reason that she's afraid of coming out is because she believes it will burden her adoptive fathers. Yes, you heard me correctly. Courtney is an adopted daughter of two openly gay men. However, they don't explain in great detail as to why she won't come out. Courtney says her parents have been through enough by being openly gay, and that her being gay as well would burden them, and she doesn't want to do that to them. Now, this plot is extremely shaky, but it isn't why I hate Courtney. I can't stand Courtney because her ends don't justify her means. She wants to hide the fact that she is gay. That's fine. However, she is willing to protect a serial assaulter, that being Bryce Walker, to reach said goal. Courtney is portrayed to not be a bad person, just someone afraid of coming out. She even planned on lying in court to hide who she is. It really didn't help that in the latter half of the season, most of the other reasons believe they should just come clean and acknowledge what Hannah said and get justice for her and Jessica and all of the people that Bryce hurt over the course of his time at their school. But Courtney, almost to the very end, is still trying to deny and die on the cross that Hannah was lying, and the icing on the cake is she is told that no one cares that she is gay.
You're gay, so what?
There are at least 5 gay characters in the show if you include Courtney, 7 if you include her dads, and no one cares. So seeing her go to such heinous lengths for no logical reason really pissed me off. If her parents were anti-gay straight people, I could get behind the story. It would be cliche, but at least it would make more sense than what's there right now. So as I was editing the video, I realized I didn't bring this up in my section about As I was editing the video, I realized I didn't bring this up when I was talking about Courtney. I do believe that Courtney's story could have worked out really well with the elements that they put into the script already if it was just tweaked a little bit. Like, Courtney learned her parents' backstory as they've gone through their lives and experienced prejudice for being openly gay. I think that if you would have made that her driving force for why she didn't want to come out and why she was defending Bryce and trying to shut down Clay, I think that could have worked way more, and I would have been more emotionally attached to her character and understood where she was coming from, opposed to what it currently is in the show that I mentioned earlier. I think that if it was Courtney doesn't believe she's strong enough emotionally to deal with that happening, because granted, I can't speak from that standpoint, I can't speak from a racial standpoint. Like, I know there are people that exist in the world that just hate me because I am the way that I am. So I have an understanding, like, yeah, I get it. Some people are going to hate me just because I exist, even though that's ridiculous, and I have, like, a thick skin to that mentality, so it doesn't bother me. But I can definitely see people who aren't strong enough to deal with something like that. So if Courtney's case was she can't deal with the way that people treat homosexuals in the world, and that's why she wants to stay in the closet, I could have been more on her side and understood why she made the decisions that she did. And hell, even in the show, granted this pertains to seasons outside of season 1, I do remember that Tony ends up getting into a fight with Monty because Monty ends up calling him a homosexual slur. So it's like, those things do exist, and they could have portrayed that in the show and had Courtney's emotional arc being that she becomes stronger as a person and is able to withstand that prejudice, and that's what leads her to becoming a better person at the end of the show. So, with the elements given, she's still adopted by 2 homosexual parents, she is still a homosexual. If they would have just tweaked her reasoning as to why she did everything she did, I think I would have been more on her side. But, yeah, that's about it. Moving on to the next character. Yay, I get to go from my least favorite character to my second least favorite character. Marcus is just a trash person. He is vain, self-interested jerk who will do anything to improve his image. He attempted to force himself on Hannah just to prove that he could get with her and lied and manipulated Clay to try and cover his own ass. He even goes so far to plant drugs on him and call the police. He is a horrible human being, and I can't stand seeing him on the screen. To be honest, Zach isn't that bad. He's dumb but kind-hearted guy who let his pettiness get the better of him after Hannah rejected him. Long story short, Zach and Hannah shared a class where they could receive anonymous compliments, and Zach stole Hannah's compliments because she rejected him. Nowhere near as bad as anyone else on this list, Zach is also one of the reasons that regrets how he treated Hannah and wants to make amends by the end of the show. Ryan is a pretentious dick who invaded Hannah's personal space and shared her poetry without her permission. Ryan isn't in much of the story, so there isn't much to say about him, except I like him because he's the character that reality checked Courtney, so there's that.
The rapist.
Alleged rapist.
Fuck off, Courtney.
Another one with little to say about is Sherry. Sherry accidentally destroys a stop sign while driving Hannah home, which results in a car accident that gets another character named Jeff, who there isn't really a need to talk about him, killed. The secrecy of that night haunted both Sherry and Hannah, which is what led her to be put on the tapes, so she tries to make amends by helping the surviving party of said accident, and eventually she does come clean and give closure to Jeff's family. And honestly, that's really about it. Sherry does have a thing for Clay, but it doesn't really affect the plot in a grand scheme way, so it's kind of irrelevant. Oh boy, here's the big one. Bryce Walker, the big bad wolf of the show. Bryce is the gold standard for entitled rich brat that believes they can do and get away with whatever the hell they want. Bryce single-handedly played a role in 3 of the 13 reasons on Hannah's tapes. He is the one that spread the picture Justin took of her on their first date that got her labeled as a slut. He's also the one that assaulted Jessica while Hannah was paralyzed with fear in the closet. And then that brings us to his tape. Bryce forces himself on Hannah while she's at one of his parties, resulting in her finally breaking and beginning the process of recording the tapes and taking her own life. Bryce is showcased as nothing but a violent and disgusting excuse for a human being that masquerades behind the facade of being the star football player and rich kid that everyone loves. His rap sheet for the series is ridiculous. He beat down Clay, assaulted 2 women and alludes to having done it with more, manipulated his so-called best friend, and forced underage drinking of a 40 ounce. I don't know if you know how big a 40 ounce is, but goddamn, those are giant bottles on Clay. I'm probably forgetting stuff, but you get my point. Bryce is an awful human being from head to toe, and I like that about him as a character. Bryce is perceived as the boogeyman throughout the entire story. Everything that happens in the show happens around him. He's not directly involved with the stuff once the tapes are let out, because if Bryce finds out, that's game over. There is no chance that anyone is going to win and there's going to be a happy ending, because he has the power and influence to make sure that everything goes in his favor, which I really like. It makes him an intimidating presence that definitely holds up throughout the course of the show. I mean, hell, his catchphrase is "keep me clean." Like, that's something that someone who's used to doing dirty stuff, getting away with it, would say. Like, come on. Normal people don't say that. They're like, hey, bro, you can do whatever you want. Just keep me clean. That's not normal. But anyway, moving on. The final reason on Hannah's tapes, the school guidance counselor, Mr. Porter. Personally, I think Mr. Porter is in too much of the show. I feel as if he should have only appeared to break up the crazy things that happened at the school and been a minor character. Like, I didn't need to know he had a wife and kids. I didn't need to see him comforting a teacher about Hannah's passing or deliberate with the school over their impending lawsuit. The only thing that mattered was his connection to Hannah. You see, before Hannah took her own life, she gave everything at one last chance. She went to go see and speak to Mr. Porter in the hopes that maybe it would reignite the flames of hope in her soul so she wouldn't end up taking her life. And as she left his office, she was hoping that Mr. Porter would follow after her after all of the horrible things they discussed, but he didn't. He was overwhelmed and didn't see fit to go and chase after her, and unfortunately, after that conversation, she deemed life unlivable and went and ended everything. Mr. Porter is given the tapes, and he is left with the opportunity to be a better guidance counselor in person in the future, in the hopes that he won't relive a tragedy like this and will be able to save students that he counsels rather than letting one slip through his fingers. Finally, the girl behind the mystery, Hannah Baker, is a very difficult character because this show hinges on the fact that you'll like her character, and if you don't, then everything falls apart. I know a lot of people couldn't get into the show because they hated Hannah's personality, and after this rewatch, I can see why. I remember when I first rewatched it, I didn't understand why people didn't like Hannah, but now that I'm a bit older and having rewatched it, like I said, I kind of understand it now. Hannah has a very abrasive personality. She's moody, sarcastic, a bit judgmental, and very self-loathing, with a dash of pretension that does not make for the most likable person. However, potential hot take, I think that was completely intentional because it makes you second guess if Hannah brought this on herself. I think that it's shown best in tapes 11, 12, and 13. In tapes 11 and 13, Hannah does things that weren't in her best interest when her and Clay start to get intimate, and she panics, she tells him to leave instead of explaining what is wrong, despite her audibly thinking to herself that she wants him to stay. In tape 12, Hannah leaves her house in the middle of the night and goes to Bryce's party, and she also, again, audibly states that it was a terrible idea to go to the party, but she says she just kind of wandered in on her own with no clear intention. She just kind of did it. I am by no means saying Hannah caused her assault or anything like that, okay? I'm not saying she caused all of the bad things to happen to herself, okay? I just want to make that clear. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just bringing up the sense that Hannah herself does state that she has made bad choices that led to an outcome. I guess the best example would be if you went into a place wearing rich and gaudy clothing that's known to have a high crime rate, and then you got robbed. Obviously, being robbed was wrong and it shouldn't have happened, but you kind of set yourself up to be robbed, if that makes any sort of sense. Lastly, in tape 13, Hannah goes and speaks to Mr. Porter, as I mentioned in the previous section. However, when she goes and speaks to him, she refuses and denies all of the help that he tries to give her, leaving her no choice to receive any form of assistance. She tells him that she's been assaulted, but she won't tell him who it was, when it happened, where it happened, etc. So when Mr. Porter is like, okay, I need to report this to the police or to the school, or I need to know who it is so I can deal with this person, she doesn't give him any information. She just says, I've been assaulted, pretty much. And he's like, well, I can't help you if you don't share any information with me to stop said individual. And the only option left would more or less be for you to move past it if you don't want to deal with it. Despite Hannah still having people in her life that she cared about, she felt isolated due to her abrasive personality and all of the negative things that happened to her, forgetting all of the positives, which I think is a very real thing, and I like how they handled it in the show. 13 Reasons Why is paced pretty well when the story focuses on the mystery of Hannah Baker's tapes and the teenagers involved with it. However, it does drag to a halt whenever the story decides to focus on the adults in the cast. Whenever the show cuts from the teenagers and the mystery of the tapes and goes to the principal dealing with the lawsuit, or Clay's parents worrying about him, or Hannah's family falling apart after her passing, the show just really slows to a snail's pace because I don't care about this stuff. It doesn't further the main narrative at all. The one scene that undeniably pushes the story forward that has to do with the adults is obviously the scene where Clay and Mr. Porter are talking to each other about the tapes because, well, it's self-explanatory. That is the only scene that I can 100% say is relevant to the main narrative of the story. There are a few other scenes that do help play into it, but most of them are just hard cuts to pad out time. Like, I don't need to see Clay's mom ground him for the millionth time because he's been running around solving the mystery of the tapes, because it ends up amounting to nothing. Like, he gets grounded, but his parents don't really do anything to ensure that he stays grounded, so he just sneaks out easily. So it's like, what's the point of having this in the story if it's not really going to add any agency to everything that's going on? Cliffhanger endings work within reason, and I believe that this show is one of those instances. Season 1 has many open-ended questions that never needed to be answered. Does Bryce go to jail? What happens to Justin? Do the Bakers win their trial? Does Alex survive? Does Tyler become a school shooter? Etc. None of these plot threads needed answers because they don't pertain to the mystery we came for. It's like with Inception. No one needed to know if Leonardo DiCaprio made it back to the real world or was still in the dream. It's irrelevant to the story. So I don't see why 13 Reasons Why couldn't do the same thing. Especially since I did a quick Spark Notes peek into the book, and it said the book still ended with cliffhangers as well, so why couldn't they just do that in the show? Alright, I want to start this off by saying I am not a medical professional, and I have never been diagnosed with any mental disorders, and I have never been at risk of harming myself in my entire life. So I cannot speak on how this scene in particular would affect your mental state. The only thing I can say is I do not believe it should have been taken out of the show from a narrative standpoint. You see, Hannah's death in the original cut of 13 Reasons Why was shown firsthand. You experienced her death alongside her. And I think Catherine Langford and Kate Walsh did fantastic in this scene. They really gave it their all because it felt like they understood the severity of what was going on. So, in the original cut of the scene, you see Hannah slit her wrists. You're there with her, she's terrified, and you see the fear and regret in her face as she's going through with the process. And it also helps to reality check you, because I know when I first watched the show, there were moments where I would be so enveloped with the plot, I would forget that Hannah was already gone. So I'd be like, yeah, hopefully things work out. And then it's like, no, that's not possible. She's already gone. This whole series is taking place long after all of these flashback sequences. So I think the scene also helps to reality check the audience and remind you, no, this can't work out. Seeing all of these things and getting justice and all that stuff, it's never going to happen because she's already gone. She can't experience all the positive outcomes of whatever is happening right now. And I really did love that. I feel like all the talk about how this scene was like very traumatic and harmful to you is a bit overreactive, because the scene in season 2 of 13 Reasons Why where Tyler is assaulted by Monty is way worse and completely unnecessary in the grand scheme of the show. And it's still there. Like, if you watch the episode now, it hasn't been cut or edited. It's still there the same way it was when it was released, and people had problems with it. That I agree with. That was unnecessary, because Tyler's beating that he receives in that scene is way worse and has no narrative purpose. Like, Tyler gets his head smashed through a mirror and bashed through a sink until the sink breaks. It's a ceramic sink. His head smashed through it till it breaks, and then he's drowned before he's sodomized. And it's like, the sodomy was unnecessary. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen to people in real life, obviously. It's possible that could have happened to someone out there, but you didn't need to show that. Like, the beating he received was enough to push him to the breaking point that would lead him down the dark path that you wanted for the show. Meanwhile, in Hannah's case, seeing her take her life hurt the audience because it hits you super hard that, like, she is gone. There is no saving her. No matter how much I want it, it's never going to happen. And then because you witnessed that firsthand when her parents go to find her, the original scene, it starts off with Hannah in the tub. You see her in the tub, the water's running out, it's all red because of her blood, and then her parents are walking in, you hear her mother talking to her. She's like, Hannah, what's going on? This tub is overflowing, like it's getting into the hallway, we're going to need to clean it up. And then she opens the door and immediately breaks down because she sees her daughter is gone. And she starts freaking out. She's hoping that she's okay. She's like, come on, wake up, you gotta be fine. The dad walks in, she's freaking out, telling the dad to go and call the police. It's a really good scene, and you feel it as the audience because you've seen the Baker family be broken down over the course of the entire season, and you know that they don't recover from this. So you don't want them to open the door, because not only are you feeling the pain that Hannah went through because you're like, you're making a dire mistake that shouldn't happen, you also know what's going to happen to her family. So it works really well in the confines of the story on a narrative standpoint. So I don't understand why it needed to be taken out, because I do remember seeing article headlines saying that this is promoting teen suicide and it's affecting teenagers the most, but 13 Reasons Why is a show for adults. It's a show that is rated mature. It's for adults. So I don't get why the big thing is that it's affecting teenagers when they're not supposed to be watching the show. And I understand that teenagers see things that they're not supposed to all the time. I've seen R-rated movies as a teenager, but it's just like, if I was affected by said R-rated movie, that's kind of mine and my parents' fault. It's not the show's fault. They made content for a specific audience that is then being consumed by people that shouldn't consume it. And now here we are, where there's repercussions for it. So, strictly, like I said, from a narrative standpoint, I do not believe that Hannah's death should have been removed from the show. I think it should have stayed in. And yeah, moving on to the final conclusion. 13 Reasons Why is by no means a perfect show. Hell, I've highlighted some of the flaws throughout the course of this entire video. However, I do believe season 1 was very solid, and it was ruined by the media circus of controversy after controversy and the horrific nightmare 3 seasons that followed, whatever, continued after this season. So I really think that 13 Reasons Why season 1 is fairly solid. The controversies that followed it, I will admit, some of them, as I mentioned, I don't think were necessary. Others, I do believe that the show brought on itself, like the fact that in season 3, Bryce is given a character redemption arc after they confirm that all of the atrocities that he's done throughout the course of the entire series is true, or, as I mentioned, Tyler's assault, that didn't need to happen, or how Monty is portrayed as a closeted homosexual, and that is supposed to justify his aggression and violence throughout the course of the entire series, which it doesn't in the slightest bit. It doesn't justify anything that he's done. So, all in all, I do think that season 1 of 13 Reasons Why is a fairly solid murder mystery with a very good premise. I love the premise of the show. It is what hooked me in and made me watch it to begin with. So, at the end of the day, that's 13 Reasons Why Season 1. I hope you like this video. If you managed to make it to the end, like, comment on your thoughts about the show. If you agree with me, disagree with me, so be it. And at the end of the day, I'm the innocent villain. And remember, folks, you're innocent until proven villainous, and catch you in the next one.